If you've ever sat through someone else's celebration, smiling while your heart shattered, this story is for you. What started as a birthday toast to my husband's ex turned into a midnight takeover no one saw coming. Subscribe now and join a community that believes in quiet power, emotional justice, and women who rise from humiliation to own the room. Let's begin. There are moments you never forget, like the taste of betrayal in a room filled with applause. It was Leo's 38th birthday. The lights at the Corinthian shimmered over cut crystal and champagne towers. A jazz trio hummed in the corner, and everything was polished, elegant, curated to reflect him. A self-made tech CEO with a calendar booked 6 months out, and a wardrobe made entirely of tailored arrogance. I had planned the entire event. I always did. The guest list, the private chef, even the exact shade of roses that would match his cufflinks. I knew the optics mattered, especially to a man like Leo Hayes. Only invite people who matter, he'd said a week before, scrolling through his phone during dinner. Investors, influencers, and Nadia, of course. That last name slipped in like a breath, casual but sharp. Nadia, his ex, the one he dated before me. The one who, according to LinkedIn and my sleepless 2 a.m. searches, had just launched her 3rd successful startup. She's in town? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She's a friend, he said without looking up. Besides, it's good optics. Of course. Optics. So there I was, in a gold dress I'd custom-ordered from Milan, standing near the bar as guests flooded the ballroom. I shook hands, smiled, made conversation about mergers and IPOs, but the whole time, I was counting the minutes until she walked in, and at exactly 8:17 p.m., she did. Nadia, in a scarlet silk dress that made every head turn, her hair swept into a knot that looked like it had taken 0 effort and 10 years off her face. She hugged Leo like they were in a film, her laughter high, delighted, echoing too loudly. I watched as his hand lingered on the small of her back, longer than necessary, longer than acceptable. He didn't introduce me, not right away. He never liked awkward moments. Instead, he turned to her, wine glass in hand, and said, loud enough for our circle to hear, "You were always the one with vision." I smiled then, a tight, practiced smile I'd perfected over 3 years of charity galas and boardroom soirees. Inside, my stomach turned. I was his wife. I built his image. I managed his calendar, prepped his press, picked out the shirts that made him look trustworthy in interviews. And now, on the night meant to celebrate him, and by extension me, I was a silent fixture while he toasted another woman's brilliance. By the time he tapped his glass for a speech, the room fell quiet with reverence. I took a step back, standing in the shadows near the velvet curtains. "I want to thank everyone for being here," Leo began. "Every year, I feel humbled by the caliber of people around me. Tonight isn't just about aging, though I'm still under 40, thank God. It's about legacy." He paused, scanning the crowd. Then, inexplicably, his eyes landed on Nadia. "Some people enter your life and leave fingerprints on everything you build. Nadia, you've been one of those people for me. Your early encouragement, your belief in what I could become, those things mattered." There was a murmur, a few glances. He lifted his glass. "To Nadia," he said, and the room toasted her. Not me, not his wife, not the woman who'd stood beside him through lawsuits, sleepless launch nights, and investor tantrums. No, they toasted her. I couldn't breathe. I smiled again, because women like me know that crumbling is never done publicly. I raised my own glass, touched it to my lips, and made eye contact with no one. But inside, something broke. Not a crack, not a tear. A clean, silent shatter. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the champagne or the adrenaline or the blister forming near the arch of my left foot from those 6-inch heels I'd worn to look worthy of standing next to Leo. No, I didn't sleep because something shifted. Something final. I sat on the edge of our California king bed, makeup still half removed, watching Leo scroll through photos of the party on his phone, like it had all gone exactly how he wanted. When I finally spoke, it came out calmer than I expected. "You toasted her." He didn't look up. "It was a compliment. To your ex," I said, "at your birthday party, with your wife standing 10 feet away." He sighed, setting the phone down on the nightstand. "You're overreacting." That was Leo's favorite phrase, his weapon of choice. He could deliver it with such nonchalance that it made you question your own memories. "I was being gracious," he added. She's a known name. Her presence elevated the event. You said yourself the investor from Boston stayed longer than expected, as if I should be grateful for Nadia's existence. I wanted to scream, but instead, I nodded. Because wives like me don't raise voices. We document. It's funny. Before Leo, I worked in strategy. Not tech, not marketing. Strategy. I knew how to spot a gap in power, how to turn silence into leverage. I'd trained for this. I just forgot to use it, until now. And the next morning, Leo left early for a meeting. I stayed behind, staring at my reflection in the gilded mirror of our walk-in closet. I didn't look angry. I looked erased, the kind of woman who becomes part of the decor. My phone buzzed. From Nadia. Amazing party last night. I meant what I said. He's lucky to have you. Hope I didn't overstep. She didn't mean that. Or maybe she did. Maybe Nadia was the kind of woman who tossed matches into gas-soaked rooms with a smile, and then walked out barefoot, unburned. I stared at her message for a long time. Then I opened my notes app and started a new file. Timeline, Leo and Company. Because I knew something most people didn't. I'd never signed away my shares. Not when we married. Not when he cleaned up the cap table. Not even when he suggested I convert them into a trust for tax reasons. He thought I had, because I let him think that. But silent women take notes, and sometimes they wait 3 years to use them. At lunch, I met with Aileen, the CFO Leo once called too aggressive for board meetings. I liked that about her. She was sharp, underestimated, slightly bitter, perfect. We met at a quiet cafe in Lohi, where tech bros didn't go and no one would overhear. I want to talk about restructuring, I said. She raised an eyebrow. You're not even on the board. Not officially. Aileen set down her coffee. What's this about? I know what Leo's been doing with the R&D budget. I know about the Shell contract in the Caymans. And I know he's been soft pitching a merger that would cut out 17% of the staff, most of whom are women or over 45. Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders straightened. You're bluffing. I reached into my purse and handed her a sealed manila folder. Open it when you're alone, I said. And call me when you're ready. I left before she could ask more. By the time I returned home, Leo was already there, pacing in the sunroom, muttering about investor pressure and quarterly projections. Everything okay? I asked, tilting my head. He waved a hand. Nothing for you to worry about. Perfect. Let him underestimate me. Let him believe I was still playing the part of the glossy wife, the background figure in his photos. Because by midnight tomorrow, I would be something else entirely. Aileen called at 6:14 a.m. I read it, she said. I didn't ask what she meant. I just waited. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that says someone is rethinking every past conversation they've ever had. I always thought you were decorative, she said finally. Turns out you're strategic. I was both, I replied. One was for optics. The other was for survival. She chuckled, low and bitter. What do you want? I took a breath. A vote, when the time comes. And you think that time's coming? I know it is. By 9 a.m., I was in the penthouse conference room at Hayes and Dalton HQ. Not as Leo's wife, not even as a shareholder. I was just there dropping something off. That's what I told security. And that something was a signed document. My original agreement with Leo when I invested in his company 5 years ago, before we were married, before his hair went gray at the temples and his ambition turned acidic. The agreement was legally binding. No clauses had been dissolved. No shares had been reassigned. He never noticed the version I signed wasn't the one he redlined during our trust talk, because I knew Leo. He only read the parts he wrote himself. I handed the document to Lauren, the executive assistant who'd once complimented my earrings and never spoken to me again. Have legal take a look, I said. Page 7 in particular. Lauren looked confused, but I smiled. That kind of smile women like me are taught in boarding school and etiquette class and divorce hearings. Gracious, unbothered, lethal. By 11:30 a.m., I was back home. Leo was in the living room, on a call with someone he called Babe, more warmly than he'd ever said my name. He didn't notice me standing there, didn't even flinch when I cleared my throat and said, "Lunch?" He covered the phone. "Later. I'm on a call." Of course. I walked past him, heels silent on the tile, and poured myself a drink. Water, not wine. It was too early to be drunk, too early to celebrate, but I could feel it coming. Not yet, but soon, like the way the sky darkens before a storm, just enough to make the birds go quiet. At 3 p.m., I got a text from Aileen. You'll have my vote, and 2 others. That's majority. I read it twice. Then I walked into Leo's home office and kissed him on the cheek. He looked startled. What's that for? For being predictable. He laughed. I'm not predictable. I'm disciplined. I smiled again. Of course. In that evening, I met Nadia. She'd invited me for coffee and closure. I accepted because women like me never walk away from a war until they've inspected every front. We met at a rooftop lounge she chose, a place where the lighting was flattering and the waiters wore cologne. She stood when I arrived. I'm glad you came, she said. I ordered tea. She ordered wine. Leo's complicated, she began. He's consistent, I replied. Nadia tilted her head. You're not what I expected. I'm not here to impress you. That caught her off guard. She sipped her wine. I never meant to cause trouble. Of course not, I said gently. And I never meant to inherit your mistake. But here we are. That silence stretched between us, sharp, taut, female. You know he tried to buy me out, she said suddenly. Back in year 2. Told me he'd take care of me if I stepped away. I raised an eyebrow. And did you? No. I sold to someone else, quietly. I didn't think it mattered. It always matters, I said, especially when the shares still carry voting power. Her eyes widened just slightly. I smiled. Because in war, it's not the speech that wins. It's what you don't say. There's a type of man who thinks control is love. Leo was that type. The kind who made compliments sound like policies. The kind who gave expensive gifts with disclaimers. Wear this one tonight, he'd say, holding up a diamond bracelet. It photographs well. He didn't mean it looked good on me. He meant it matched his watch, reflected well under flash photography, and made investors think we were curated. I let him control the surface of our life for 3 years, because beneath that surface, I was learning how he operated, how he dismissed, redirected, masked truth with charisma. He thought I was silent because I didn't have anything to say, but I was silent because I was listening. And the morning after my meeting with Nadia, I went into Leo's study while he was out golfing. The passcode was still his birthday, the same one I used to plan. Inside, I didn't go for the obvious files. Leo wasn't sloppy. He wasn't the type to leave smoking guns in his Dropbox. He was arrogant, though, and arrogance always leaves fingerprints. I went to his bookshelf, the leather-bound collection of CEO inspiration he never read but displayed proudly. And there it was, The Art of Power, spine slightly bent. Inside was the flash drive. It was labeled Roadshow B-Deck Internal. I plugged it into my laptop with the kind of dread usually reserved for courtrooms and final verdicts. Slides clicked by. Growth projections. Fabricated metrics. Promises of user engagement that didn't exist. He was selling a company he didn't actually own. At least, not fully. Because I still held 11.3%. And Nadia? She'd sold her shares to someone I'd quietly traced back to Aileen's cousin. Between us, we had 51.8%. He was pitching a merger based on numbers that wouldn't survive an audit, and he didn't know I could trigger one. Mine. Now by noon, I had printed every slide, organized them in labeled folders, and placed them inside a matte black briefcase. It was the same one Leo had given me for our 2nd anniversary. Just in case you want to go back to work someday, he'd said. The implication was clear. He didn't think I ever would. That night, we hosted a small dinner at the house. Just close friends, he said. Translation, board members, influencers, a tech journalist who owed him a favor, and a hedge fund guy who once referred to me as arm candy with a law degree. I served drinks. I smiled. I told the story about how Leo once forgot his wedding ring at a VC meeting and bought a replacement from a vending machine as a joke. They all laughed. And I laughed too, because he'd never worn a wedding ring again after that. Symbolism is outdated, he once told me, so I stopped wearing mine. But after dessert, Leo stood to make a toast. I knew the rhythm of his voice. I could predict his pauses, his metaphors, his faux humility. But this time, he said something new. I've been working on something big, he announced, lifting his glass. A merger that will take Hayes and Dalton into the future. We'll scale, innovate, lead the market, and it all starts next month. Cheers erupted. He looked at me like I should be proud. I raised my glass and said nothing. But inside, I was counting down. Not to next month, to midnight. Because power isn't taken in public. It's claimed quietly, behind doors, with signatures and silence. And I had both. The midnight doesn't arrive with fireworks. It creeps in quietly, almost shy, like it knows what it's about to witness. At 11:47 p.m., I sat in the downtown office of Dalton and Craig LLP, a firm Leo used for compliance filings. He thought of them as just another service, but I knew better. I knew that Martin Dalton, one of the founding partners, used to be a client of my late father. And unlike Leo, I remembered that favors are a currency far more enduring than capital. Martin sat across from me in a charcoal suit, no tie, glasses perched on the end of his nose. "You're sure about this?" he asked, tapping the folder I'd brought. Inside were share certificates, digital access credentials, and notarized consent forms, signed by every board member whose loyalty I had secured over the past 10 days. Every woman Leo had called emotional in a meeting. Every advisor he'd interrupted mid-sentence. Every person he assumed had no teeth behind their handshake. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. Martin didn't smile. He simply turned and handed the paperwork to his paralegal. "File it. Timestamp it. Send confirmation to the registrar." I checked the time. 11:53 p.m. 7 minutes to ownership. 7 minutes to everything Leo thought was untouchable slipping from beneath him. At 11:58, I sent Leo a text. "You might want to check your inbox. Happy early morning." He didn't respond right away, but at 12:01, my phone rang. I let it vibrate 4 times before answering. "You've lost your mind," he said. His voice was sharp, strangled. "No," I said. "I found my leverage." There was a silence so long, I thought the call dropped. "You forged something," he said finally. "This isn't legal. I didn't forge anything. I used everything you taught me. Strategy, timing, optics. You can't do this to me." "Oh, I didn't," I replied. "You did this to yourself." And then he arrived at our penthouse at 12:34 a.m. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the gallery frames in the hallway. I stood in the kitchen pouring tea. He stormed in, face flushed with fury. "What the hell do you think this is?" "It's a transfer of voting control," I said simply. Effective immediately. He lunged for the briefcase I had left on the counter. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a board resolution naming me interim CEO pending final vote ratification. All signatures in ink. "You won't get away with this," he growled. "I already did." He stared at me, hands gripping the counter. "You're nothing without me," he whispered. And I finally smiled. "Then you should have treated nothing better." And I didn't sleep that night, but this time, not from dread. This time, I stayed up watching the city lights blink through our windows, sipping tea that no longer tasted bitter, and wondering how many women sit in silence for years, gathering their strength not for revenge, but for reclamation. Because what I took back wasn't just a company. It was my name, my voice, my story, and I wasn't done. Not yet. And then by morning, the narrative had already started shifting. News of my appointment hit the press at 7:03 a.m., just as Leo's publicist was probably finalizing a glowing feature about his visionary leadership for Forbes. Instead, the headlines read, "Hayes and Dalton appoints new interim CEO. Surprise board vote restructures power." And just beneath it, inside the silent coup, how Eleanor Hayes took the reins overnight. They used my full name, not Mrs. Hayes, not the wife of tech mogul Leo Hayes, just Eleanor. The identity I'd placed in a drawer 3 years ago, right next to my MBA diploma and the original business plan I wrote for a startup I never launched. Not out of failure, out of love, the kind of love that silences ambition, because someone convinced you that partnership meant stepping back so they could shine. Well, Leo had shone long enough. It was my turn to burn. He didn't come home that day. Instead, I got a barrage of legal emails, all sent from his lawyer's junior associate. The tone was formal, frantic, and poorly masked in faux legalese. "We request a temporary injunction to prevent the ratification of the board's vote pending further review of shareholder status." Martin forwarded the message to me with a single note. "They're flailing. Stay steady." And I did, because I had prepared for this. Women like me prepare in the dark, with flash drives and private bank accounts, and a spreadsheet titled Contingencies. At 1 p.m., I stepped into the office for the first time in over a year. Not as Leo's +1. Not as the woman who planned the Christmas parties and pretended not to notice when the junior developers looked confused by her presence, but as their new CEO. The receptionist stood when I entered. "Good afternoon, Eleanor," She corrected herself quickly. I smiled, but didn't stop walking. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, except for the low hum of cables, one of those sounds you only notice when you're nervous or alive in a way you haven't been in years. I was both, and when I stepped into the boardroom, 3 people stood. Aileen, of course, calm, crisp, already reviewing financial projections. James, the head of operations, who once referred to me as a quiet asset. And Nadia. I paused. She wore navy this time. No red, no dramatics, just power, buttoned up. You're early, I said. I had a feeling today might be interesting, she replied. I took my seat. Aileen slid a folder toward me. New org chart, updated compensation packages, severance proposals for Leo's inner circle. Keep them fair, I said. You're not in a burning mood? Oh, I'm burning, I said. But controlled fires clear dead wood. They don't scorch the earth. And we spent 3 hours in strategy. Not gossip, not gloating. Strategy. Because women like us, dismissed, dressed up, labeled as emotional or overreaching, we build quietly. We plan. We document. And when the moment comes, we don't scream. We sign. At 4:47 p.m., Leo sent me a single message. You've made your point. Let's talk. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I turned to Nadia, who was reviewing a preliminary press memo. You knew this would happen, I said. She didn't look up. I knew he couldn't help himself. I studied her, the woman he toasted, the woman he once thought I could never compare to. She looked tired, but free. You ever wish you'd stayed? I asked. No, she said, but I wish I hadn't wasted so much time proving I was worth staying for. I nodded, because I knew exactly what she meant. And that night, I packed a single bag, not because I was running, because I was moving, out of Leo's penthouse, out of the museum of our curated marriage, out of the script he'd handed me when we said, I do. He thought this was a battle for a company. He didn't understand. I wasn't reclaiming a title. I was reclaiming myself. Addio. I met Leo at our lawyer's office, though technically, after the board vote, my lawyer now held the retainer. He chose the corner conference room. Of course he did. The one with the glass walls and skyline view. Optics always mattered to Leo, even in defeat. He stood when I entered, half out of habit, half out of some residual need to appear civilized. I didn't bother to sit yet. I'm not here for a performance, I said. Neither am I, he replied, adjusting his cuffs like he was about to pitch a product he no longer owned. Silence settled between us, thick with history, the kind you can't summarize, the kind you feel in your bones. He gestured toward the chair across from him. I remained standing. I read the filings, he said. It was clean. Ruthless, but clean. Ruthless, I repeated. Interesting word, especially coming from you. He leaned back, watching me carefully. You've changed. No, I said. I just stopped performing. He opened a folder and slid a document toward me. An offer. Of course. Stock options. A seat on the board. A lifetime consulting title. In exchange, I give him back the CEO role. I don't need your permission to lead my own company, I said. But you need stability, he replied. Investors want continuity. You and I, together, we project control. You toasted your ex at your birthday dinner, I said quietly. In front of your wife. You don't project control. You project carelessness. His jaw tightened. You're angry. You're making emotional decisions. That again. I leaned forward, palms on the glass table. You built this company with my seed money, Leo. You scaled it with my operational models. I held your hand through 2 lawsuits, rewrote your product launch after your CMO quit, and hired your replacement when you panicked. You may have designed the architecture, but I reinforced the foundation. I never asked you to, he muttered. No, I said. You just assumed I would. He stood then, voice hardening. This performance? This coup? It won't last. You think the board will keep you long-term? You're a placeholder. They'll want someone public-ready. Someone less personal. Funny, I said. That's exactly what they said about you. He blinked. I dropped the envelope onto the table between us. His face paled. You've been cooking the user data, I said. Padding monthly actives with dormant trial accounts. It's all in there. Documented. Verified. You didn't think I'd find it? His fingers twitched. I let him sit with the realization. You should resign, I said, publicly. Say it was for family. Say you're stepping back to advise. I'll grant you emeritus status. You'll keep your equity, you'll stay relevant, and you'll walk away with dignity. He stared at the folder like it was a weapon. It was, because the truth always is. And that night, I didn't go back to the penthouse. I stayed at the Carlton, where the rooms smell like citrus and the sheets are pressed with military precision. I took off my shoes and opened a bottle of wine, not champagne. I wasn't celebrating. I was rebuilding. The press coverage was already shifting. From silent partner to boardroom strategist, who is Eleanor Hayes? It felt surreal. For years I'd been a shadow, the woman behind the curtain, the spouse in the background. Now I was the headline. And Leo? He hadn't sent another text, because he knew. The terms were clear. I wasn't negotiating anymore. There's a strange kind of calm that comes after you've detonated a life and survived the explosion. Not peace exactly, more like a hush. The kind of silence a battlefield settles into before the survivors begin to count each other. That's what the next 48 hours felt like. Investors called, journalists emailed, employees whispered, but no one questioned the vote, because the paperwork was solid, the signatures clean, and the timing devastatingly perfect. Leo hadn't resigned yet, but he hadn't shown his face either. That was enough. I spent the afternoon at HQ, not in Leo's former corner office, which still smelled like cedar and arrogance, but in a smaller one across the hall. It had clean lines, a window facing east, and nothing on the walls. It was mine now. Aileen came in at 3:12 p.m. sharp. She dropped 2 folders on the desk. One red, one gray. Red is everything you asked for, she said. The skeletons, the loose ends, the emails he should have deleted. And the gray? She tilted her head. Things he didn't know you needed to see. I opened it slowly. Inside were memos, names, salaries. A list of female employees quietly let go in the past 18 months. Some under the guise of restructuring, others under nothing at all. There's a pattern, she said. You already know it. But here it is, documented. It hit harder than I expected. This wasn't just about Leo anymore. This was a system, a culture, a legacy of curated cruelty disguised as vision. I leaned back in the chair. We're cleaning house. You'll take flak, she said. I'll wear armor. She gave me the smallest of smiles. Welcome back. At 6:40 p.m., I checked in on Leo's calendar. Old habits. Still synced to my phone. He never revoked my access. He never thought I'd use it. There it was. 7 p.m. at the Summit Room. A private dinner with Bennett from Core Vantage Capital. The same firm he'd been courting for 6 months. The same firm that now had a question in their inbox. Are you aware of the discrepancies in H&D's MAU reports? I didn't send it anonymously. I signed it. Eleanor Hayes, interim CEO. I arrived at the Summit Room at 6:59, uninvited, unnoticed. The hostess blinked when I gave my name but said nothing. Leo and Bennett sat near the back, laughing over Negronis. The table was set for 2. That would change soon. I walked over calmly, ignoring the heat rising in my chest. Eleanor, Bennett said, standing with the stiffness of a man not sure whether to hug, bow, or run. Leo turned. His expression froze. Gentlemen, I said. I'll be brief. Leo stood slowly. You're not supposed to be here. And yet, here I am, I replied. I slid a single-page printout in front of Bennett. He scanned it quickly. Leo's face drained of color. Monthly active users, real versus reported, I said. And the memo where your CFO asked Leo to delay disclosures. Bennett blinked, then looked at Leo. Is this accurate? Leo stammered. I answered for him. It's already been submitted to the SEC. Leo nearly choked. You didn't... Oh, I did, I said. We're self-reporting. Proactively. It looks better. Bennett pushed back his chair. The meeting was over. I turned to Leo. You still have your equity. Your silence ensures it stays liquid. Violate that, and we open the vault. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew I wasn't bluffing, because I never did. I'm back in my hotel room. I ordered room service and turned off all notifications. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. But the balance was shifting. Not just in the company, but in the narrative. For 3 years, I'd been the woman beside the man. Now, I was the story. And this story had only just begun. In the first time I saw my face on a news site, it was beneath a headline that said, "The woman who outplayed a tech titan, who is Eleanor Hayes." There was a photo I didn't remember posing for. Me stepping out of a black car, briefcase in hand, sunglasses on. I looked like every other high-powered executive on a Thursday morning, but the caption said everything. From CEO's wife to CEO, an unprecedented takeover. I didn't read the article. I didn't need to, because for the first time, they weren't talking about Leo. They were talking about me. The board met again on Friday morning. It wasn't a dramatic event. No shouting, no fireworks. Just confirmation of what had already been decided. Leo had voluntarily stepped down to focus on personal matters. That was the official line. Unofficially, he'd lost the game he didn't even realize he was playing. I watched the room as the vote passed. Not a single dissent. Aileen handed me the final document to sign. As my pen touched the paper, there was a quiet in the room. Respectful, almost reverent. I wasn't just filling a seat. I was shifting a culture. I didn't go back to my hotel afterward. I went to the east wing of the building, where the product team worked. They were the heart of the company. Even if Leo had treated them like a liability, they weren't expecting me. That was the point. I walked through the rows of desks, smiling softly as developers looked up from screens, blinking in surprise. A few stood awkwardly. One even clapped, then stopped, unsure. I stopped near a young woman, Lena, if I remembered right, who'd once been asked in a meeting if she was just an intern. "Lena," I said, "can I see your latest sprint board?" She stared at me like I'd just spoken fluent code. Yes, right here." I leaned over her desk, listening as she explained. I asked questions, real ones, because power isn't always in titles. Sometimes it's in being the first person to see someone fully. And later that afternoon, I received an email from Leo Hayes. Subject? Dinner? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know how, because I wanted the space between us to expand a little further, like a wound healing without needing to be reopened. I met him at a quiet bistro he used to love, the kind with linen napkins and wine lists that required translators. He stood when I arrived. Old habits. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but as if the scaffolding around him had finally been dismantled. "Thanks for coming," he said. I didn't say you're welcome. I sat. We ordered nothing, just water. He exhaled hard, like he was still adjusting to the weight of not being the most powerful person at the table. "I've been thinking," he began, "about everything. About us." I stayed quiet. "I think I mistook your silence for contentment," he continued. "No," I said. "You mistook it for permission." He looked down, then back up. "I was selfish. You were strategic," I corrected. "You just assumed I wouldn't be." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You were always smarter." "I still am." That landed, but there was no cruelty in my voice, just truth, plain and deserved. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. I tensed. He opened it slowly. Inside was my wedding ring, the one I stopped wearing after his birthday toast. "I kept it," he said. "I don't know why." "Because you knew the moment was coming," I said. "You just hoped it wouldn't." He looked at me, eyes glassy. "Do you still love me?" I took a long breath. "I loved the version of us I invented in my head," I said, "and I mourned her. The woman who believed you'd always protect her dignity." His jaw clenched. "But that woman's gone," I finished. "And the one sitting across from you doesn't mourn anymore. She moves." He closed the box. This time, I stood first. "I wish you well, Leo," I said. "Truly. But from here on, we write our own stories, separately." And outside, the air was crisp. I took off my jacket and felt the night on my skin. Freezing, alive, clear, and for the first time in years, mine. And the first full day in my office as official CEO felt quiet. Not in the literal sense. Phones rang. Keyboards clacked. The espresso machine in the executive lounge hissed like it was mad at someone. But inside me, something finally stopped spinning. That constant reel of anxiety, second-guessing myself, reading Leo's mood before mine, editing my voice down to make space for his, was gone. And in its place, clarity, the kind that doesn't ask for applause, the kind that simply acts. My first internal memo didn't mention Leo once. It didn't mention me much either. It mentioned culture, equity, and accountability. And one line in bold: "We don't succeed by pretending we never made mistakes. We succeed by refusing to repeat them." It wasn't revolutionary, but it was mine. And for the people who'd been quietly waiting for the tone at the top to shift, it meant everything. And by midday, my inbox was filled with messages I hadn't expected. Not congratulations. Confessions. People who'd felt unseen, unheard. People who'd left because they didn't feel safe. People still here who'd learned to hide. A line from one email stuck with me all afternoon. I've stayed because I believe this place could be something better. Please don't let it go back. I wouldn't. I scheduled one-on-ones with everyone Leo had once called non-essential, starting with the ones who'd never been in his orbit. The operations manager from accounting, the janitor who knew which elevators jammed, the HR associate who once caught Leo referring to her as window dressing in a Slack message he didn't know was shared. It wasn't just optics. It was reconstruction. Because a company isn't built on charisma and PowerPoints. It's built on people who show up before sunrise and leave after the last slide deck has been submitted. And I wanted them to know, I see you, I value you, I need you. By 4 p.m., I met with legal. The folder Aileen had given me, the gray one, filled with quiet wrongs, was now a to-do list. We're reviewing every exit package from the last 2 years, I said, and I want outreach calls made to every woman who left, every person who filed an anonymous complaint, every contractor who wasn't renewed without explanation. The head of legal, a man named Grant who wore expensive socks and rarely blinked, raised an eyebrow. Is this strategic? Yes, I said, but not in the way you think. Litigation risk? He asked. No, I replied. Legacy. He stared at me for a long moment before nodding. Understood. At 5:30 p.m., I walked the floor again, not to check on anyone, just to be present. Presence was something Leo never understood. He thought power lived in distance, but I knew better. Power lives in attention, in knowing people's names, in remembering their kids' birthdays, in asking how they really are, and listening, and sometimes, in standing beside someone when they least expect it. I found Lena again by the elevator. She looked startled. I didn't do anything wrong, she said quickly, clutching her laptop. No, I smiled. You did something right. She blinked. I handed her a folder. That mentorship program you proposed last year, the one Leo shelved. Her eyes widened. I read it, I said. It's smart, scalable. We're launching it. She covered her mouth, then whispered, Thank you. No, I said softly. Thank you for not quitting when you had every reason to. None that night, I walked into the penthouse for the last time. Not to stay, just to collect a few things. The silence was thick. The rooms felt like a museum of a life I'd already grieved. I went to the closet and found the gold dress from Leo's birthday party, the one I wore when he toasted Nadia. It still smelled faintly like regret and Chanel. I folded it gently and placed it in a donation bag, because I was never going to wear it again. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't need to. Back in the mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. Not Eleanor the wife, not Eleanor the accomplice, not even Eleanor the silent. Just me, sharp, still, unapologetically present. It happened on a Tuesday, quietly, almost mundanely, like all the moments that end up defining us. The day began with a bored breakfast. Nothing dramatic. Scones, espresso, polite nods, a few wary glances from directors who once praised Leo's tenacity, but never questioned his methods. They questioned mine now. Of course they did. Power in a woman looks different. It unsettles people who mistake stillness for weakness and composure for compliance. But I didn't flinch. Not when they asked about fiscal year forecasts. Not when one of them muttered PR stunt under his breath. And especially not when the oldest director, a legacy investor, asked me, Do you really have what it takes to lead? I looked him in the eye and replied, You already voted yes. What you're really asking is whether I'll lead like Leo. The answer is no. That's the point. The room fell silent. Then Aileen chuckled. And then, slowly, so did the others. Not out of mockery, out of recognition. And that afternoon, I received an invitation to a panel on modern leadership in tech. They wanted me to speak. Not Leo, not Mrs. Hayes, just me. I stared at the email for a long time, because 3 months ago, they wouldn't have known my name. Now they were offering me the mic, and I wasn't about to waste it. While the panel was held in a glass atrium downtown, overlooking the city that once felt too big for my voice. I wore navy this time, structured, sharp, not to impress, to embody. When the moderator asked, What's your biggest leadership lesson? I didn't pause. That silence is not the absence of power. It's the collection of it. I saw heads nod. Women, especially. Women who knew. Women who had sat through meetings holding a scream in their throat, waiting for a moment to matter. women who had smiled while being erased. I spoke for them, but also for the woman I used to be. She deserved that. After the event, a young founder approached me. She looked barely 25, nerves in her shoulders, fire in her eyes. "I've never heard someone say what I've been thinking," she said. "Not like that. Not out loud." I shook her hand firmly. "Then promise me something. Anything. When they try to quiet you, don't get louder. Get smarter." She smiled. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me," I laughed. "Call me Eleanor." Later that night, I found myself walking through the city without an itinerary. No schedule, no obligation, just freedom. I passed a restaurant Leo and I used to love. They were seating someone at our table. I didn't stop walking. That chapter was closed, but not buried, because I wasn't ashamed of it anymore. Even the worst pages taught me the language of survival. Anati. Back at my new apartment, clean lines, full of light, no ghosts, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. There, in my drafts folder, was something I hadn't touched in years. The original pitch deck for a company of my own. Not Leo's. Mine. I had written it before we got engaged, then shelved it like so many women do when love asks for space and life demands compromise. But now I had leverage, resources, vision, and most importantly, I had myself. And that night, I started rewriting it. New name, new mission. No edits for someone else's ego. Every slide a reclamation, every idea a rebellion. Because legacy isn't what you build for others. It's what you finally build for yourself. Tansina no Mesran 2 weeks after the panel, my inbox was a battlefield of polite invitations, media inquiries, and a new genre of email I hadn't seen before. Apologies. From former colleagues, from investors who once ignored me in meetings, from women who had left quietly and were now writing, not just to congratulate, but to confess. I didn't think it was possible. You reminded me I still have time. I should have stayed longer, but I'm watching now. And tucked between them, one email from Leo. Subject, final papers. There was no message body, just a PDF. His formal resignation from the board, signed, dated, and worded with all the dignity of a man who had finally accepted he'd been outplayed. Not just in business, but in understanding what power really is. I didn't reply, but I opened the document, read every word, and then, gently, almost ceremonially, archived it. That chapter was over, and I was busy writing the next one. The new company I was building didn't even have a name yet, just a vision, something that existed to protect, amplify, and fund women-led innovation. Not as charity, not as diversity, but because we make money, we make markets, we make meaning, and we do it while being talked over, underestimated, and sidelined, until we stop waiting for permission, until we own the building where permission gets handed out. My assistant Maris brought in coffee around 9:15. She was new, sharp, observant, and the first person I'd hired entirely on instinct. "There's a woman in the lobby," she said. "Didn't have an appointment. Says she used to work here, under Leo." I felt my stomach shift. "Name?" Maris glanced at her notepad. "Clara Witt." I remembered Clara. She had left 3 years ago, abruptly. No exit interview. No LinkedIn updates since. I asked once, and Leo told me she wasn't cut out for the pressure. I nodded. "Send her up." Clara stepped into my office like she wasn't sure she was allowed to exist there. Her shoulders were tight. Her hair was shorter, but her eyes, those hadn't changed. Still sharp, still scanning. "Clara," I said gently, "it's good to see you." She sat, slowly. "I almost didn't come." "Why did you?" She swallowed. "Because I watched you sit at that man's side for 3 years and smile like it didn't hurt. And now you're sitting at the head of the table. I needed to see if it was real." "It's real." She looked around. "And this is yours?" "All of it." Her breath caught. She didn't cry, but something in her face cracked open. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because eventually," I said, "even the quiet ones run out of patience. And when we do, we don't just speak. We build." She nodded slowly. I slid a file across the table. "I want you to come back. Not to Hayes and Dalton. To what's next." Her fingers trembled slightly as she took it. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," I said. "Thank you. For surviving a culture that never saw you. Now let's build one that does." And that night, I hosted a small dinner at my new apartment. No press, no photographers. Just women I respected. Women who'd once left jobs in silence. Women who were starting again. Women who had never been given a platform, so they built one with whatever scraps they could find. We toasted, not to revenge, to reclamation, to dignity, to leadership that doesn't demand silence to function. And as we laughed, shared stories, and passed plates like old friends, I realized something. I wasn't lonely anymore, because I had finally found the company worth keeping. Tava! It began with a name. Not mine. Not Leo's. Not borrowed from Greek mythology or the Latin word for innovation. Just a single word, handwritten on a notepad during a sleepless night. Ember. Because that's what it felt like. The thing that had burned quietly in me for years, hidden beneath silence, contained by love, dismissed as supportive or background. An ember isn't a spark. It's what survives the fire. And when given breath, it becomes something unstoppable. Ember. A venture fund, accelerator, and advisory platform dedicated solely to women building companies after being told they never would, or shouldn't. We didn't chase headlines. We chased patterns. The women who left quietly, who started again with nothing but a Google Doc and a vision, who didn't know the rules, or refused to play by them. We found them. We funded them. We amplified them. And within 3 months, we had 27 startups in our pipeline, all led by women who had been labeled difficult, inexperienced, too emotional, or, my personal favorite, not the right cultural fit. I knew we were doing something right when my phone buzzed with a text from Aileen at 2:41 p.m. on a Thursday. CNBC just called Ember a quiet revolution. Thought you'd enjoy that. I did, not because I wanted press, but because the phrase was perfect. We were never loud. We were just done waiting. So I visited one of our first founders the following week, a single mother named Ria who was building a fintech platform for women freelancers because her bank wouldn't approve a loan for her unless her ex-husband co-signed. She greeted me in sneakers and a sweatshirt. "I don't own heels anymore," she said. "That's how I know I'm finally free." I laughed. "Do you miss him?" she asked, not cruelly. I knew what she meant. "Some parts," I said. "But mostly, I miss the woman I was before I bent myself to fit him." She nodded like she understood exactly, because she did. That weekend, I took a walk through the old Hayes and Dalton building. No cameras, no announcements. Just me, alone. They'd changed the signage already. Leo's name was gone. The gold lettering stripped and replaced with a sleek, neutral logo. It didn't hurt. It didn't even feel real. It felt like closing a book you'd read so many times you stopped feeling the paper. I walked past the conference room where Leo once told me I was too emotionally involved to handle high-level decisions. That same room now held a portrait of our new leadership team. 7 women, 1 purpose, not to avenge, but to architect. Back in my apartment, I poured tea and opened my journal, a habit I'd abandoned during my years as Mrs. Hayes. I wrote a single line. "This is what happens when we stop asking for seats and start building the damn table." Then I underlined it. Twice. Because I knew now, power isn't inherited. It's constructed. Patiently. Relentlessly. Intentionally. And sometimes, it's built in silence. 1 ember at a time. It was a Sunday when Leo called again. I almost didn't answer. Not out of anger. Just detachment. The way you might ignore a song you once loved but have since outgrown. But something in me was curious. Not about him. About what kind of man calls the woman who dismantled his empire without screaming. "Eleanor," he said quietly. "Do you have a minute?" "I have 5. He let out a breath, half laugh, half regret. "I've been thinking about that night," he said. "My birthday. The toast." Of course he had. "It was cruel," he added. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to reward him for finally noticing what I had felt in real time. "I did it to provoke you," he confessed. "Because I could feel the shift happening. You were pulling away. I wanted to remind you who you were married to." There it was. The truth, naked and years late. He continued. "I thought if I could diminish you in public, you'd shrink again in private." I closed my eyes. He wasn't crying, but I could hear shame folding into his voice like creases in paper. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I just needed to say it." I opened my eyes. "Good, because I don't forgive you." A pause. "I've learned," I added, "that some things shouldn't be forgiven. Not because we want revenge, but because some pain deserves to be remembered, not erased." He was silent. Then softly, "You were never small, Eleanor. I just needed you to be." "I know," I said, "and that's why I left." I hung up. Not dramatically. Just firmly. Because some doors don't need to slam. They just need to close. Later that afternoon, I walked through the Ember offices barefoot, holding a box of old photographs I'd unearthed from storage. One was of me and Leo at the original Hayes and Dalton launch party. I was in a silk jumpsuit, holding a glass of champagne, smiling, wide and sincere, because back then, I believed the story we were selling. Aileen passed by as I was taping the box shut. Burning the past? No, I said. Archiving it. She smiled. Do you want me to? I'll do it, I said. Some ghosts you have to file away yourself. And that evening, Clara held her first session of the mentorship program Lena had designed. We turned the glass room in the back into a small amphitheater. No stage, just couches, coffee, candles, candor. 20 women, different industries, different ages, one unspoken bond. They'd all once been silent. Not anymore. Clara began with a simple sentence. Let's talk about the moment you realized your silence was costing you something. The stories that followed weren't loud. They were surgical, precise, and real in the kind of way that makes people lean forward without realizing it. I didn't speak that night. I just listened. Because power isn't always taking the mic. Sometimes it's passing it on. At home, I stood by the window and looked out over a city that no longer intimidated me. There were lights in the distance, offices still on, taxis blinking, lives unfolding, and I thought of something my grandmother once told me when I was a little girl afraid of the dark. We don't chase the sun, darling. We learn how to make fire. That's what I'd done. Not just for myself, but for every woman who watched me burn quietly and wondered if she'd ever feel warm again. And I knew then, vindication doesn't always look like a takedown. Sometimes it looks like legacy, lit by the match they didn't know you kept. The ink was already dry, but I still hesitated before signing the last page of the last document that tethered me to Leo. It was the final equity restructuring, a formality, a clean split of remaining assets and intellectual property rights, confirming that the company he built with my capital, and I rebuilt with my backbone, was now, in every legal sense, mine, not as revenge, as reclamation. Maris entered with tea and a small envelope. She didn't speak, just set it gently on the table beside the document. There was a courier, she said, from Leo. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared at the contract, the last act in a play I never auditioned for, but ended up rewriting. And then, calmly, I signed. Eleanor Hayes, CEO, sole managing partner, founder, Ember Ventures. One day, the letter inside the envelope was handwritten, a rare thing from Leo. It was short, just 6 lines. I hope one day someone asks how I lost it all, and I'll have the decency to say, because I forgot what she was capable of, and she remembered. L. I read it twice. Then tucked it inside the drawer where I kept other relics of the past, old press clippings, archived receipts from our wedding, and one matchbook from the restaurant where he toasted another woman on the night I began becoming someone else. I didn't need to burn it. I already had. And that evening, the Ember offices hosted a quiet celebration. No speeches, no branded banners. Just music, laughter, and the glow of women talking like they owned the world. Because some of them finally did. Aileen toasted with sparkling water. Clara brought cookies she'd baked herself. Lena cried when she saw her name listed as program director on the new website. No one said Leo's name. It wasn't out of censorship. It just wasn't relevant anymore. Auntie. Near the end of the night, one of our youngest interns, barely 20, still unsure of her voice, asked me quietly, "How did you know it was time?" I looked at her, really looked, and said, when the pain of staying quiet became louder than the risk of speaking. She nodded like she was going to carry that for a long time. But now, before leaving, I paused in front of the portrait in our entryway. Not of me, of all of us. Taken the day we launched Ember, unfiltered, laughing, messy-haired, and raw, and perfect. Not because we had it all figured out, but because we'd stopped waiting for permission to begin. As I turned off the lights and walked into the night, I realized something simple. This story wasn't about Leo, or even about the company. It was about becoming, about refusing to stay edited, about choosing to rewrite yourself, page by page, signature by signature, until the ending finally feels like yours. More and mine, it doesn't end here. It starts here.